Gemara in a Mishnah in the Gemara of Maseches Tainus, and it is here in this Gemara where the Gemara describes what this Jewish holiday of Tu B'Av, what this Jewish holiday of the 15th of Av is all about. So we'll start here on my right-hand side. It's text number 1, so it's the next page over. Yeah.
Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel said there was no happier days for Israel than the 15th of Av and Yom Kippur. For in those days, the daughters of Jerusalem would go out dressed in white garments which they had borrowed in order not to shame anyone who had none. The daughters of Jerusalem would go outside and dance in the vineyards. What would they say? Young man, raise your eyes and see whom you choose for yourself. Do not pay attention to beauty, pay attention to family, it says. Charm is false and beauty is futile. A God-fearing woman is to be praised. And it continues, give her of the fruit of her hands and her deeds will praise her in the gates. Also it says, go out, O daughters of Zion, and gaze upon King Solomon, upon the crown with which his mother crowned him on the day of his nuptials and on the day of the joy of his heart. The day of his nuptials, this is giving of the Torah. The day of the joy of his heart is the building of the temple. May it be built speedily in our days.
So this is the famous part of the Gemara. There is a lot to discuss in regards to this actual process of what took place on that day. That's not what we are going to discuss today, because the Mishnah is telling us something very interesting. That the 15th of Av was the greatest day in regards to festivals for the Jewish people, similar to no other day than Yom Kippur. And because of the greatness inherent in the day of the 15th of Av, that's why it was chosen as a day to bring singles together for marriage. In other words, the 15th day of Av was already previously marked as a great day of joy, and therefore it was chosen for matchmaking. It wasn't because on that day it was a day of matchmaking and that's what made it a special day. There was something already previously in Jewish history that marked the 15th day of Av as a special day, and that's why later on it was chosen as a day specifically to bring young Jewish people together. So the question obviously is, what happened on the 15th of Av? Before this story of the young women going out on this day in Jerusalem. What made this day so special? So the Gemara is going to record for us that in fact there were 6 historical events that took place on the 15th of Av. And these historical events took place before it was instituted as a day of matchmaking. And we'll see then, from all these 6 events, which one the sages said was the most special of all of them. So let's go now into the next text. Let's go to the text number 2. And text number 2 is from the Gemara in Tainus. Text number 2 is a continuation. Now the Gemara is discussing, why is the 15th of such a special day? Why was it chosen for later on in history to be a day of matchmaking? So we'll read the English inside of the Gemara. Yeah, go ahead. So the Gemara is going to quote the Mishnah, and now the Gemara wants to understand the Mishnah. The Gemara is going to decipher the Mishnah.
I can understand Yom Kippur being a festive day because there is pardon and forgiveness. The second set of tablets were given on that day. But what is the significance of the 15th of Av? Rabbi Huda said in the name of Shmuel, it is the day when the tribe were permitted to intermarry. Rabbi Yosef in the name of Rabbi.
So I just want to explain that. I'll just explain that very quickly. It used to be originally that the Shvatim were not allowed to marry one into the other, because then that would have an effect in regards to the inheritance of the land, by the way, which had to do very much with last week's parsha with Slavchan's daughters, where they were allowed to inherit land, but they had to marry men specifically from their shevet. This way there would be a transfer of land. But ultimately, on the 15th of Av, that decree was annulled, and Shvatim, different people, were allowed to intermarry within their tribes. Let's read the next one.
Rabbi Yosef said in the name of Rabbi Nachman, it is the day on which the tribe of Binyamin was allowed to re-enter the congregation. Okay,
so once again, not to get too much into the story, but in Shoftim, in Judges, we have a story of Pilegish Begiva, where members of the tribe of Binyamin sin terribly, and there's a civil war amongst the Jewish people. The tribe of Binyamin is almost decimated by the rest of the Shvatim, and for a long period of time they were considered as outcasts. It was on the 15th of Av, where it was kind of the next generation, their tshuva was accepted, and they were re-entered into the Jewish people.
Rabbi Bar said in the name of Rabbi Yochanan, it is the day when the people of the desert ceased to die.
So that was when the spies came back, and then the plague had affected the Jewish people in the sense that that entire generation was not to enter the land of Eretz Yisrael. It was on the 15th of Av that the plague had stopped and the generation had stopped to die.
Ula says, it is the day on which Hoshea, the son of Elah, removed the gods at Yeravam, the son of Levad, had stationed on the roofs to prevent the Israelites from visiting the temple on festivals. He proclaimed, they may go off and serve whatever they wish.
Many people aren't aware that we have in Kings a civil war amongst the Jewish people. After Shlomo passes away, his son Rechavam takes over, and it is there that for a specific story, especially about the taxes that he charged the Jewish people, Yeravam ben Nevat, that's when there is the divide between the southern kingdom and the northern kingdom, the house of Judah and the house of Israel. And Yeravam, one of the things he realizes that he would never really have an advantage, because at the end of the day, the northern kingdom, the southern kingdom, they would have Jerusalem. And his people, 3 times a year, would want to go there. It's when he set up guards that didn't allow his people to enter Eretz Yisrael. And then this was a time where a king after him took away those guards, and the Jewish people are allowed to go back to Yerushalayim.
Rav Matner said it is the day on which the dead of Beitar were allowed burial.
So this connects to Tisha B'Av. We know one of the things that took place in Tisha B'Av, one of the 5 things that took place in Tisha B'Av, is that is the day Beitar fell. Together with Bar Kokhba's revolt against the Romans after the destruction of Beis Hamikdash, the final revolt against the Romans, Beitar fell. And for a long period of time, the soldiers, the dead on the Jewish side, were not allowed to be buried. It was on the 15th of Av that they were allowed to be buried.
Rabbi and Rabbi Yosef both said it is on the day on which they start chopping wood for the wood pile on the altar. Boaz taught, Rabbi Eliezer HaGadol said, from the 15th of Av onwards, the strength of the sun diminishes, and they would cease to chop wood for the pile of the altar. Rav Menashe says that day was called the day of breaking the axe.
So come the commentaries, and the commentary will explain this last one. Come the commentaries, and the commentaries tell us something very interesting. Our Gemara just gave us 6 historical events that took place in Tu B'Av. From all of them, it is this cutting of the wood that received this interesting name, the breaking of the axe day. Meaning to say, it was never called the day Beitar soldiers were allowed to be buried. It was never called the day the plague stopped. So Beitar was an area in Eretz Yisrael. It was the stronghold where Bar Kokhba's rebellion took place against the Romans. Modern historians say something like 500,000 soldiers died on the Jewish side. So those were both Jewish soldiers and other mercenaries from other countries that were revolting against Rome as well. 500,000. And that was the final revolt. The third and the final revolt, the Jews revolted against the Romans. Beitar is the place where that revolt took place. That was the stronghold of the Jewish army.
And what was it?
Where?
Yeah.
I'm not sure where in the land of Israel. I'm not familiar with that. I'm sure it's an easy Google search. I just don't know.
Oh, yeah, there are a few.
Yeah, there's Beitar Elite, there's Beitar. I don't know if that's where ancient Beitar was. I don't know.
Oh.
Could be just
It's the name of the place.
Yeah, there is Beitar in Israel today.
Yeah.
So the commentaries say that obviously the Gemara, if they were to choose one which was special out of these 6, that is equated, like I said, to the joy of Yom Kippur. It would be the annual conclusion of the chopping of the wood. This is at the core of the holiday. This is why Tu B'Av really received its inherent holiness and its inherent happiness, and that obviously needs a tremendous amount of explanation. What is this chopping of the wood? What's so special about it? Why, from all these other 6 historical events, does the Gemara say it was this day that Tu B'Av received that other name, which was known as the day of the chopping of the wood, or the day of the axe? So what's going on? What's this wood? What's this axe? What's happening here? So we need a bit of historical context. The times of the Beis Hamikdash, the chopping of the wood for the Mizbeach, for the altar, began in the month of Nisan. In Israel, it is in the month of Nisan when the sun starts coming out and where summer begins. When would it conclude? The chopping of the wood would conclude on the 15th day of Av, because past the 15th day of Av, meaning to say halfway through the month of Av, the summer is already in the past, and now the wood is becoming too moist, and if the wood is moist, the wood is becoming wormy, and therefore it will be invalid for used during the Beis Hamikdash. And that's why it was a very small period of time that the Jewish people were able to go chop wood to have for the altars, because they had to have eitzim, they had to have wood that was dry, not moist, and not wormy. So let's go inside text number 3. Text number 3 is from Rabbi Shmuel ben Meiri, the Rashba, and this is his commentary on Bava Basra. Text 3. On the day.
On the day they finished cutting the wood, there was rejoicing, being that it was the day on which they completed such a great mitzvah.
So what was the rejoicing on the Tu B'Av? They completed such a great mitzvah where they had concluded this chopping of the wood for those few months during the summer times, and that was a great joy. And obviously, the question we ask is, the sacrifices, the korbanos that were consumed on the altar, on the Mizbeach, they were indeed a great mitzvah. They are a mitzvah that we are told about specifically in the Torah. But does this transform the day of Tu B'Av into the greatest day, identical to Yom Kippur? On Yom Kippur, as the Gemara told us, it's the holiest day for the Jewish people. It's a day when we are forgiven, so from our side, it's a day of happiness, but it's also a day that the relationship between a Jewish person and Hashem reaches its deepest moment. Once you start talking from a perspective in Chassidus, you start talking about the levels of Yechidah, and that is the result of that is us being forgiven from all our averos, all our sins throughout the year. So what can really match this kind of happiness? A happiness of being forgiven for what you've done the entire year, and B, a happiness of a Jewish person reaching the deepest of relationship possibles with HaKadosh Baruch Hu. So even though we've explained what this chopping of the wood day is, and the historical elements, the context, the time makes a bit more sense to us, we're still not fully understanding what is the great joy that took place. Yes, it's a mitzvah, but can you equate this to the day of Yom Kippur? And the question runs a bit deeper. When actual korbanos, when actual sacrifices were brought, we have no description, we have no command of any type of celebration. Nowhere do we have the word simcha when it comes time to a sacrifice, when it comes time to a korban. Korban was avodah. Korban was service. Yet, when they finished cutting the wood, which was only a facilitator, which was only an element to allow the korban to take place, that's when we have a celebration with the greatest joy of the year. It's like being more happy. Well, you can understand this from some people's perspective. It's like being more happy, tailoring the suit or cutting the materials than actually wearing the suit. Being more happy, tailoring preparing the gown than actually putting on and wearing the gown. So when we actually gave a korban, we have no type of description anywhere in the Torah or in the Gemara about an overall element of simcha. During certain times there was simcha involved, but that was not the korban. That was, say, it was the musaf, the extra, because it was Yom Tov. It's the v'samachta b'chagecha. You're not rejoicing in the korban. You're rejoicing in the you're not rejoicing in the korban. You're rejoicing in the Yom Tov. So once again, we see something very interesting here, that the preparation for the mitzvah brought more joy than the mitzvah itself. So obviously there needs to be something a bit more to this wood cutting, something that a bit more than meets the eye. Everyone with me?
Mm-hmm.
What's with this wood cutting? So now we have to go a step back. We said that the 15th of Av had already been historically established as a day of great joy and holiness, and it's only that's why it was chosen later as a day for matchmaking. So we said, what was that earlier day? We brought 6 examples. We're focusing on that was the day where the wood had completed. Yet we're still troubled as that joy, as to A, what's such a great joy, and B, the korban itself did not elicit as much joy as the preparation to the korban itself. So let's now take it a step back. How long was the Golus between the first Beis HaMikdash to the second Beis HaMikdash? 70 years. So, interesting to note that before the first Beis HaMikdash was destroyed, already 70 years before the first Beis HaMikdash was destroyed, Jewish people from Eretz Yisrael had been sent into Golus to Baba, into Babylonia. Then you have Babylonia destroys, Nebuchadnezzar destroys the first Beis HaMikdash, and now it's almost everybody, almost all the Jewish people find themselves going to Bavel. In fact, that's how the Rambam describes the fast of Tzom Gedalia. It's not necessarily that it was that Gedaliah died. It was just on this day that when Gedaliah died, that was the last type of ruling presence in Eretz Yisrael, and then everyone left. Even Yirmiyahu, the Navi Yirmiyahu, went to Mitzrayim with the rest of the Jewish people. That's really what the fast is about. Not necessarily the death of Gedaliah, but the fact that with Gedaliah's death came really the exclamation mark to Golus. So the Jewish people find themselves in Bavel, and then Media and Persia conquer Bavel, so Jewish people find themselves in Media and Persia as well. And now they're returning to Eretz Yisrael with the construction, the building of the second Beis HaMikdash that was being done by Darius II. But what many people are not aware of is that the second Beis HaMikdash, the efforts to build the second Beis HaMikdash were faced with many, many hardships. First of all, many Jews did not want to leave Babylonia. Why not? Right? They're building the second Beis HaMikdash. Should everyone have ran there? We think of it in our times. Right? We have a state of Israel. Is Eretz Yisrael. Shouldn't technically we all be living there, running there, but we have responsibilities. Some of us have families, some of us have set up businesses, some of us have roots, some of us have, aging parents we need to take care of. In fact, most Jewish people stayed in Bavel. Only 42,000 Jews returned. You know what that means? That's smaller than the Melbourne Jewish community. The community was poor. The community was small. And in fact, one of the biggest issues that they faced is during these 70 years of Golus, the neighboring tribes, the neighboring countries around Eretz Yisrael, or those that lived within Eretz Yisrael together with the Jewish people, had taken over Yerushalayim during that 7 years. What do you think, they just left the place barren? So you have Jewish people are trying to build the second Mikdash, yes, with the help of the Persian ruler, with his help, with his finances, but as they're building, they're engaging in warfare. They're being shot at, they're being attacked as they're building the second Beis HaMikdash. But even further, In contrast to Shlomo HaMelech's temple, which was gilded in gold, the second Beis HaMikdash was built of much more simple brick and mortar and stone. And the treasury of the Beis HaMikdash for the second Beis HaMikdash in the beginning wasn't even able to afford firewood for the Beis HaMikdash. And that's why, right in the origins, right in the beginning of the second Beis HaMikdash, several families of this tiny, poor community, they came forward and they said they're going to resolve this crisis of the Beis HaMikdash's treasure not being able to afford wood for the Mizbech, and each family donated a specific quantity of wood. In all, the Gemara tells us it was 8 families. They were the ones that supported that very critical year of the first Beis HaMikdash. And as a reward, the Gemara tells us, for their generosity, each family was rewarded a date in the calendar. Their family had a fixed date in the calendar. And then, as the years would go on, even though the treasure would then fill up, and the community, with the help of Ezra and Nehemiah, would strengthen, both spiritually and physically, monetarily. Nevertheless, even though the community now was able to afford, the Beis HaMikdash now was able to afford wood, every year on that date, they would once again donate to the temple. They would once again bring wood to the temple, kind of as in memory, but in recognition of that crucial first year. And that day was a Yom Tov for each family. Those 8 days was a personal Yom Tov for their family. So let's read a little bit about this inside. We'll go to text 4a, which is the Gemara in Tainus that explains. Sorry, go ahead. Yeah, go.
There were 9 times during the year.
I said 8 by mistake. It was 9 families.
During the year when the Kohanim and people would bring wood for the wood pile on the altar. The Mishnah continues to list the 9 days and the specific families she would bring that were in these days. So
it was 9 days, 9 families. Let's move on to the next text, which is the Rashi on this Mishnah.
מתנדבים להביא עצים, והיו מקריבים קורבן אותו היום, ואפילו היו יוצאים הרבה למערכה, היו אלו מתנדבים, מקריבים באלו 9 זמנים.
Right, so on those days, the Kohanim and the people would donate wood for the Karbanes, and once again, like I said, it was now beyond that crucial first year. So even though there was wood available for the wood pile, for the Mizbeach, they would still donate on their specific day. Let's go further in the next text, which is another continuation in the Gemara.
Rabbis taught, why was it necessary to establish special times for offering wood? When the exiles returned to Israel, they found no wood in the wood chamber. Those who were then present donated their own wood. The prophets among them instituted that even if the wood chamber is full of wood, those families would still be able to donate of their own. As it says, and we cast lots for the wood offering, the priests, the Levites, and the people to bring to the temple of our God, to the house of our forefathers at set times year by year, to burn on the altar of the Lord our God, as it is written in the Torah.
By the way, this wasn't just a little joyous day for the family who was donating. The family's celebration was so powerful that it would postpone a fast of Tisha B'Av that was postponed. So let me give you an example. For example, last year, not this year, close to this year because it's Motzei Shabbos, but when Tisha B'Av falls out on Shabbos, when do we have Tisha B'Av?
40 minutes.
If Tisha B'Av falls out on, let's say it's Friday night, Shabbos day,
Sunday.
we push it off to Sunday. It's Nitche.
Is that what's happening this year?
No, that happened last year. This year it falls out on Motzei Shabbos, on the night of Shabbos, so therefore it goes. It's Nitche, meaning to say Tisha B'Av versus Shabbos, Shabbos overpowers Tisha B'Av. So if you have Tisha B'Av falling on Shabbos, not on Sunday like this, if falling on Shabbos, you push it off to Sunday. What happens if it was pushed off to a Sunday, which is the 10th of Av? What happens if that Sunday happened to be one of the families which their date was the 10th of Av? They would not fast on that day. Everyone else did. The entire community would fast. That family would not fast on that day. I don't know if they had to have a nedeva, if they had to make up for it on a different date, but the simcha for that specific family was so joyous that if it ever happened, the family who had the 10th of Av won, if Shabbos had pushed off Tisha B'Av to the 10th of Av, they would not fast on a Tisha B'Av that had already been pushed away. We can read that inside. That
would have been every year because it would have been the same day every year.
Yeah, but only
For that family.
for that family, and only if it happens to be a Shabbos, it happens to be a Tisha B'Av that falls out on Shabbos. So whenever Tisha B'Av would fall out on Shabbos, which doesn't happen very often, but whenever it did, and then it's pushed off to the 10th of Av, there happened to be a family that had the 10th of Av day, so it would be on that specific kviyah, so it would be on that specific calendar of that year that they personally would not fast. How many times did it practically happen? Probably a few, not too many. Never mind whether it happened or not, the concept itself is telling us that this joy for the family was quite immense. Let's go into the text number 5a. Continuing, 5a is the Gemara in Tainus continuing.
Rabbi Eliezer ben Tzadok said, I'm a descendant of the tribe of Benjamin. One year, the fast of the night of Av fell on Shabbos and was suspended until Sunday. We began fasting, but did not complete the fast until the special fast.
So maybe began fasting in a certain sense of what? Maybe that was just a zeicher, like similar to what, let's say, we would do with children or something, say fast just a little bit in the beginning of the day. Let's read Rashi. Let's go inside and see what's Rashi's commentary to that Gemara.
A descendant of Senab of the tribe of Benjamin. They were a family from the tribe of Benjamin who, in the time of Ezra, were allotted the day of the 10th of Av to donate wood to the wood pile on the altar. That day was always a holiday.
So, here again, back to the question. Yes, donations to the Beis HaMikdash deserve a celebration. But to the extent, again, a family's donation that was affixed in the calendar, to the extent that it overrides the morning of Tisha B'Av, if you were to offer a carbon on Tisha B'Av, let's say, if you were to offer a carbon on Tisha B'Av, you would still have to fast. Yet, the preparation for the carbon was cause of such a celebration that the family did not fast. Once again, getting back to that earlier question we said, it seems like there's more joy in the preparation, there's more power in the preparation than there is in the actual service itself. There was no simcha when the carbon was given. There was a tremendous amount of simcha in the day that the wood facilitated the carbon. If you gave a carbon on the Tisha B'Av, you would have to fast. If your family was one of those people that their date was the 10th of Av because they facilitated carbons, you push the fast off. So, everything we've been discussing up until now is all text from the Gemara, the Mishnah, the Gemara, Rashi, Rashbam. The questions we're asking on this is a question that the Rebbe had asked, and the Rebbe is going to give us insight. The Rebbe's answer, the way the Rebbe will explain this whole situation and its connection to Tuva, both in relation between man and Hashem, and man, man and his and another, ben adam l'lakim, ben adam l'chaveroi. Tremendous insight. What does the Rebbe say? That when I am cutting wood in the forest, I'm a facilitator. Chances are, I am not going to get any gain from that wood whatsoever. Not me. My family's pile of wood that I'm sponsoring for the Beis HaMikdash, that I've paid to have chopped, or I was in the forest there chopping it myself, it's going to go to people's personal karbanis. When you brought a carbon, you didn't have to bring wood as well. So it was going to everyone's private karbanis as well. So here I am, schwitzing away in the forest. Everybody doesn't use the word schwitzing. It's my. Here I am in the forest, schwitzing away, behind the scenes. I'm not in the actual Beis HaMikdash itself. I'm not helping the carbon being prepared in the Beis HaMikdash. I am myself not bringing this carbon. But what am I doing? I'm behind the scenes initiating the process. Essentially, what process am I initiating? Allowing others, giving others the opportunity to bring the carbon. And let's see the Rebbe's words in text number 6.
The wood itself was not a sacrifice. It merely was needed for the pyre on which the sacrifice was offered. The sacrifice offered on that wood was not necessarily theirs, nor was it necessarily a communal offering in which they would have a part. Additionally, among the sacrifices offered were sin offerings brought by individual people as an atonement. Nevertheless, these families invested time and effort to properly examine and prepare suitable wood for the altar, solely to help those individuals who have sinned, that they would be able to offer up their sacrifices for atonement. Furthermore, they were glad to give up the scarce wood that they owned, only to help someone who had sinned. This is why they established that day when they would donate their share of wood would be a day of festivity for the whole family.
Look how the Rebbe sees this whole story and this Gemara. Here is where the deepest relationship between a Jewish person and Hashem is exposed. How do I know? It's a question we can ask ourselves. How do I know? How do we know that we are deeply committed to a person or to a cause? We know when we're deeply committed, when we do things for the person, when we do things for the cause, and we don't have to be in the limelight. Where we're ready to do something for the person, we're ready to do something for the cause, and it will remain in complete anonymity. I will be completely anonymous, and I'm still willing to give 100%. That's an indicator when I know I am deeply engaged in this relationship with this cause or this individual. I can be behind the scenes in the forest, schwitzing away, chopping away, but I'm content. Although people may never know who I am, later on it was the Nevi'im of that time that established it as a day in the calendar. But on that first year, none of those families knew that they would be remembered. But I'm behind the scenes, but at least I know I'm facilitating and I'm giving other people the much needed karbanos. That's how we know when a person is deeply committed to a cause or to a person. And this amazing celebration really, the Rebbe says, demonstrates what it means to be a Jewish person. In Yiddishkeit, it's not about me. And it's not even about the attention that I get for my actions. It's about my readiness to get involved with things for the sake of Hashem or for the sake of others without getting any attention about it. Basically, it's my commitment and my dedication even though I'm behind the scenes. And that's what the 15th of Av represents. The 15th of Av represented the Jew who didn't ask what Yiddishkeit, what the Beis HaMikdash, what the Kohanim, what the community can do for him. He was asking, what can I do for the Beis HaMikdash? What can I do for the Kohanim? What can I do for the Jewish people? In that very crucial year when it was ever so necessary to re-spark the whole process of the Beis HaMikdash. Let's continue the Rebbe's words in text number 7.
When a Jew offers up a sacrifice, it is a pleasing fragrance to the Lord. This is not said about the wood. You do not find that it is a pleasing fragrance to the Lord. Its sole function is to facilitate the offering of the sacrifice. Similarly, one who donated wood to the altar has no personal benefit. He simply wants to enable other people to offer sacrifices. This readiness to unconditionally give for someone else is, in truth, the ultimate sacrifice to the Lord. Inherent in the apparent mundane act of chopping wood is total selflessness and devotion to Hashem. He doesn't think about what's in it for himself, only what he can do for Hashem.
Good more.
This is why the 15th of Av was such a joyous day. on par with even with Yom Kippur. On Yom Kippur, the essence of the Jewish soul is revealed, the level of Yechida. The ability for a Jew to find joy and happiness in simply chopping wood for the altar is also a revelation of the level of Yechida, the innate desire of the Jewish soul to unite with Hashem.
That's how the Rebbe's understanding this great joy. Yechida is to be able to go beyond oneself, or to reach your essential self. And this process of facilitation was reaching my essential self, going beyond myself, being able to facilitate for others, and to be 100% dedicated and committed to it, even though there was no gain for me. No one knew it came from me, no one saw me, and in fact, I was very far from the Beis Hamikdash, and the carbon was not on my behalf. On the contrary, it could have been on the behalf of someone who was bringing a sin offering. This is the origins, from the Rebbe's perspective, this is the origins of the joy and the simcha that was already historically inherent into the day of Tu B'Av. Now the question is, based on this, how does it connect to later on that the day of Tu B'Av was chosen as a day for relationships? And the thing is like this, in relationships, sometimes we have to use this analogy of woodcutters. Sometimes in relationships, we need to become a woodcutter. It's at that moment when our relationships reach the ultimate of depth. You find sometimes, unfortunately, where a husband and wife, say, find it very hard to deal with the other's successes. It's a reality. You may have never experienced it in life. You may see that a husband and wife, they may be husband and wife, but yet there's jealousy involved, one to the other. Jealousy in the other's successes. They feel threatened by being outshined by the other's success. Or you can have times where a husband or wife are very happy with the other's success, but as long as they get a piece of the pie. They want some credit as well. They want their contribution to be recognized. Yeah, I know they're very successful. I know they've done so, but you know why they have the time to do that? Who watches the kids? Who pays the bills? You know, there's always something. I want a bit of credit as well. I'm the facilitator. Keep me in mind as well. They want credit. This too is not the ultimate relationship. In relationships, we're meant to ask ourselves, have we ever done something significant for a friend, a spouse, or anybody without them knowing that it came from us? Never mind without the world knowing, without our families, our social circles knowing. What about the actual person that I am in the relationship with? Are we happy to do it even though we're not going to get any brownie points, even though there's not going to be any recognition? You know, there's a very famous feminist by the name of Gloria Steinem, and she said, the sure way to be alone is to get married. That was her, I guess, justification for not marrying, although I think she married at the end. So, one thing that we do have to keep in mind is that in relationships, husbands definitely want acknowledgement from their wives, and wives are definitely yearning for genuine respect from their husbands, and we have to comply with that. There is no doubt. But at the very same time, the real sign of where this relationship going is, are we able to act anonymously as well? The person wants to be in a true marriage and a true relationship, they have to be ready, in the analogy, they have to be ready to spend time in the forest alone, to facilitate without getting any recognition. That's the real test as to whether this relationship is deep and genuine. And that's really what the 15th of Av teaches us. The 15th of Av is teaching us that true joy is not in the doing of something great. True joy is not in the big carbon. True joy is chopping the wood. Even if that wood never itself becomes a carbon. It only facilitates the carbon. Yet that's where the true joy lies. There's an interesting Mishnah in Ethics of Our Fathers in Pirkei Avos that will add a bit more understanding to this. So let's go inside to text number 9. We'll skip number 8. Let's go to text number 9.
10 things were created at twilight of Shabbat Eve, as well as the original tongs, for tongs are made with tongs.
Tongs are used to hold metal in the fire to make utensils. You must have tongs to make tongs. So who created the first pair of tongs? God himself. Now, was it so important for Hashem to prepare tongues the moments before Shabbos? Was that like the most important thing? Like, think about us, how we prepare for Shabbos, our last minute. We're very clear in our minds as to what's important and what's not. What we leave for after Shabbos, what we leave for before. What was so important about the tongues? Let's read text number 10.
The first tongues were created in order to create something else. It was needed so that Adam could create another pair of tongues. In other words, these tongues presented things that have no independent purpose. In the human experience, there are deeds that merely facilitate a meaningful act. For example, chopping wood to make fire, to make coals with which to make a knife to use for circumcision. God created those tongues himself to instill meaning even to those parts of life that seem to be only a means to a holy end. When a person is motivated solely to fulfill the divine will, his performance of the mitzvah transcends the particulars of the mitzvah. He does not distinguish between the mitzvah itself and all he must do to facilitate the mitzvah, since both are equally the divine will. The supernatural transcendent ability is not granted during the first 6 days of creation. It is a power granted by God at twilight, on the eve of Shabbat, a holy divine time.
It's a very powerful element when you think about it. Where the Rebbe is talking about that. If a person is able in their life to equate the preparation to a mitzvah with the mitzvah itself, it's a sign of really how deep the relationship the person is with Hashem as well, where they're reaching a level where they're not even differentiating between the preparation to a mitzvah to the mitzvah itself. That's how eager they are. And you think about it also in a practical relationship as well. There are moments where you can tell the relationship is, it manifests itself in just a very practical way. The relationship is happening, you're talking, you're interacting, etc. Then there's times where you have to be behind the scenes making sure that it is those moments of the relationship that can actually take place. Do you look at that preparation moments, forest moments, wood cutting moments? Do you look at that as secondary, or do we look at that as being equally important to the relationship? Because when we're engaged in the actual relationship, there's two people interacting. But behind the scenes, there's one person acting on behalf of this relationship. So do we look at it as secondary, or do we look at it as equally important?
Apparently, there's a phrase that like 80% of our time, I think we're preparing for things.
Yeah,
20% is like actually living life.
Yeah, I would think if you...
I don't know if it's 80-20.
Yeah, like if you would take into consideration how much time we spend shopping for the food, preparing the food, and then say eating the food, that would be an example I can think of.
Mm-hmm.
And this is why the wood cutting was the most joyous day of the year, because they were just as passionate about cutting of the wood than they were for the actual carbon. And this was the deepest kind of relationship. The celebration of relationship became the festival of the year. It was almost like Yom Kippur, when we achieved the most intimate relationship with Hashem. What was the connection to the wood? Once again, that was the time when that deep and intense relationship to Hashem was tested, whether we would still be in it, even without all the fanfare. Any questions?
Nice. Beautiful.
So I think we covered spiritual relationships from both perspectives. I wasn't sure whether it was supposed to be interpersonal relationships with Hashem, but I think B'Hashgacha Pratis, divine providence, that Tu B'Av was coming up, we were able to we were able to catch them both.
Isn't it? I'm just remembering last year when we went through the month of Elul, that was the first time. And the emphasis was that preparation that takes place in that month of Elul. Everybody always focuses on Tishrei and Rosh Hashanah. Well, I used to anyway, in Yom Kippur, but there was all this whole prep work that you had to do before you got to that day.
Yeah, it's the word El is Ani L'Doidi, V'Doidi Li. It's first me. Ani L'Doidi, I am to my beloved. Not necessarily, are they there? Do they see what's happening, you know? As a result of that, then you know for sure V'Doidi Li. Then you have that reciprocation. You read in the Frierdiker Rebbe's memoirs of what the town of Lubavitch must have been like. Have you ever read that? Have you heard that? So the Frierdiker Rebbe's memoirs, he describes the atmosphere in Lubavitch once the month of El came in. And he talks about, in Yiddish, he calls it an El Wind. The winds of El brushed into the city, and he talks about how people were more, solemn, people were more, serious and introspective and thoughtful, and you're able to tell that it was Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur was on its way. You want to hold on to that?